All right, well, thank you everyone for being on this panel discussion tonight. For those who are watching from home, we are having a panel discussion on Proposition 9, which is a proposition on the ballot this year for Utah County residents. And it suggests that we change our county form of government from the current 3-commissioner model to an executive council model, which is often referred to as a mayor-council form of government. As a way of introduction, my name is Jenney Rees, and I serve as the mayor of Cedar Hills. And also with me tonight is Representative Brady Brammer, who is representative for District, I should know this, 27, Utah County Sheriff Mike Smith, and Utah County Commissioner Tanner Ainge. And so the reason why we brought this particular group of people together is that we all have various perspectives in working with county government, whether that's coming from a city perspective or a state representative perspective, a department head within the county, and of course, Commissioner Ainge, who serves as a commissioner for Utah County. So for those who would like more information on Proposition 9, we do have a website. It is www.betterutahcounty.com. And for tonight, we're just going to dive into some of the questions that have come up and some of the concerns that have been raised, and hopefully address all of those. On our website, you'll find a way to contact us if there are additional questions that come up that we didn't get to tonight, but we'll just jump in and get started. So the first question I'm going to address to Commissioner Ainge. This was put on the ballot this year by the Utah County Commissioners. And so will you just give a brief introduction into what Proposition 9 is?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yes, so Proposition 9, as you said, is the opportunity to change from a 3-member commission to a executive council or mayor council form of government. So more specifically, right now, the 3 commissioners, we are the legislative and executive body. So we kind of wear both of those hats, and we also are each elected at large. So there's a county-wide race for all 3 county commissioners, no districting. So in theory, all 3 of us could be from Provo or from Lehigh or Spanish Fork. And in the new model that is on the ballot that would represent a yes vote for Prop 9, instead we would switch to a 5 districts to select a part-time council. That's the other thing. The 3 commissioners are each full-time. In the new model, there would be 5 part-time council members elected from 5 different geographic districts. And then there would be 1 full-time county mayor. So finally, that executive responsibility and that legislative responsibility would be separated in those 2 entities. And that's a basic description.
Thank you. My next question is for Sheriff Smith. You serve as an elected official in Utah County government as a department head for the law enforcement agency, obviously. So can you explain from your perspective why you feel like this is an important step for Utah County?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start with, I've actually had the pleasure of working under both forms of government. I was a chief of police and I worked for a mayor council form of government. And now as the sheriff, I work with the commissioner form of government. And so having both of those perspectives and experiences, I can tell you that working with the mayor council form of government was and has been a far more effective way to conduct business. For me, as a perspective of the sheriff and a department head within the county, I think it's important that we make this change. One of the biggest things, there's a lot of reasons when we talk about separations of power. I can tell you for me and for other employees, it is very, very difficult for us to know which direction we should take. We get multiple inputs from 3 people who have basically the same authority, can make the same decisions, and we get opposing information from them. And it's difficult for us to know what is really expected of us and what direction we should go. And sometimes the direction just doesn't come because the initiative isn't taken by any of them, because I don't know if they're assuming the other will do it, or so there's no one really in charge to make sure things are happening on that level. And it causes dysfunction within the organization. And coming into this organization, I'm a police officer and I want to be a police officer. And I spend a lot of time wading through the politics that this form of government creates. And has been a waste of time.
Thank you. I know that we've had similar experiences as a city leader, and I've talked to other mayors where when you need to advocate for something from commissioners, at times it can be challenging to know who's in charge or what direction we are going if you have 3 different opinions on that particular subject. I appreciate that insight.
I mean, if you put yourself in a position of any employee that you had 3 bosses of equal power and they're all have different ideas and directions they want you to go, you think about how successful you're going to be in that situation.
Right. Thank you for that. So Representative Brammer, you can probably add to that from a legislative perspective, but I'm also curious to know your thoughts on why a separation of powers is important.
Sure. So one of the things so our Constitution is a compound constitutional republic, but that's not how our county functions. We don't have any compound element to it. The reason why our Constitution is a compound constitutional republic is because we have this separation of powers where our citizens' rights are protected by differing and competing branches of government. And what we have right now in the county is we have a unity of those branches. And so as far as why it's important to separate those, they have different roles. And so if you're talking about the legislative branch, that's where I serve. It is not a particularly efficient branch. We're not meant to be. We're meant to be a deliberative branch that takes their time, that listens to everyone, that hears the concerns, and that tries to develop the rule set. And then we turn it over. We don't have anything else to do with it after the rule is made. And that goes to the executive branch. Now, the executive branch, in contrast to the legislative branch, is intended to be an efficient follower of those rules that are created by the legislative branch. And so when we have a unity of powers, what we end up with is we have a legislative branch that is not as deliberative and as protective of the rights as it should be, and an executive branch that lacks the efficiency that it should. And then neither of them can check each other very effectively. It's all tied together in a unitary government. And so if you would be okay with only having 5 people leading the state, setting all the rules and carrying it out, I don't think there's many people out there that think that's a good idea, or for our federal government. But it seems like the argument is oftentimes, well, we shouldn't do that for county government. And really the concern for me is we have 700,000 people in the county now. And while there are some efficiencies in terms of making rules and administering, we're losing the deliberative process, and we're not gaining the efficiency that we should have in the executive side. And that really is the primary reason for a separation of powers.
Thank you.
Hey, Mayor Rees,
Yes.
can I jump in on that one as well?
Absolutely.
I think that Brady has kind of laid out the historical or constitutional perspective there. I'd like to offer just a little bit a practical perspective, maybe a business perspective. Working with a lot of companies, there's a reason why you have a board of directors and you have a CEO. And it's a lot of the same principles that Brady just outlined. A board of directors is meant to help set the vision of the company, and these key decisions you want to deliberate on in a boardroom and ultimately have a formal vote and to hold people accountable. But you also need someone who has the energy and who is empowered to go execute on a day-to-day basis, not operate on a quarterly board meeting. And I think there's just an acknowledgement from anyone who's ever done business or worked in an organization. You can't operate on a day-to-day basis by committee. You need to have someone in charge. And so for me, that's been probably the most frustrating part of being in the 3-member form of commission. And I almost joked that you guys realize I'm on when you were complaining about how hard it is to work with us on the commission. But I'll just voice that other side of that it's frustrating on our side too, because imagine trying to negotiate, right? We're constantly trying to do the business of the county. If I'm meeting with Sheriff Smith and he says, I want to do this, and I think that's a good idea, and we have some alignment, in a mayor council forum, you would kind of work with an outside entity or even a department and develop a strategy. And sure, if it's big enough, you might have to make sure that that's approved by the council, but you can at least take it along to a certain step. And with us, it's constantly, well, I can share with you what I think, but it's just, I'm the only one of 3 votes. And then people say, well, can we just get all 3 of you in a room so we can talk about this? And the answer is actually no, unless we're in a formal public meeting that's officially noticed, because that would violate open and public meeting laws. And so it's frustrating for the external parties, as you have described, but it's also hard for us in the office.
And
Thank you for that, Representative Brammer.
Tanner brings up a really good point on the Open and Public Meetings Act. The way that transparency is done in Utah, and this is created by the legislature, and we really want our citizens to be able to know what's going on as rules are being made. And a 3-member commission defeats all of the laws that are intended to create that transparency. Not all of them, but it defeats the Open and Public Meetings Act, specifically because what that does is it says, hey, if they're talking about county business in their role as legislators for the county, on the legislative side of it, if there's any 2 of the 3, they should be doing a public meeting notice and allowing the public to see what they're talking about so that they know what's going on. And there's not a secret backroom deal between people that, that where they already know the votes before they come and put on a show before the public. That's really the intent of it. Now, every city has to go through this and they have to adhere to that Open Meetings Act. So a 5-member city council, they can't have 3 in the same room at a time talking about something that's going to come before the city council. Well, imagine if you have 3 members in a county commission and they're charged with executive functions of following through on things, making day-to-day decisions, but some of those touch in on legislative functions. Well, that completely defeats the ability for them. They're either forced to ignore the Open Meetings Act and get the job done, or adhere to the Open Meetings Act. And oftentimes that becomes so impractical that nothing is getting done and nothing is happening. And so our transparency systems are not built for a 3-member commission that has a lot of work to do like ours has. You may be able to get away with it in a smaller county with smaller populations and smaller issues, but 700,000 people, we got a lot to do. Even at a very trimmed down, slim government, there's still core governmental functions that need to happen, and they can't happen in the light of day as those decisions are being made, which is how the state law is wanting those to be made.
Agreed. And when you say 700,000 people, it's not even just the size of our county, but recognizing that we have very different issues throughout the county. So what North Utah County or Lehigh is dealing with is different from what West Utah County and Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain are dealing with as they are continuing to grow. And that's different from rural parts of Utah County who are trying to maintain their agricultural lands. And so it's acknowledging that not only are we this large county, but a county with very unique needs depending on the region that you're in. So Sheriff Smith, I know that this has been a question that's come up to you. A concern has been raised that adding more people means that we're growing government. And I know you've addressed that with citizens. So can you address that here as well?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I've heard it a lot. I'm sure others have heard it a lot. And I think it just depends on what perspective you want to use on this. To me, and the other term that goes along with the growing the government is big government. You'll hear that term used. I look at it probably a little different. My perspective is, and especially since, I've been the sheriff and I've worked closely with the commission, big government to me is 3 people, and really only 2, because that's your majority vote, making the decisions for everyone. When I look at changing the form of government under Prop 9 and adding more representation to our county, to me, that is more in line with the way our founding fathers wanted government to work, to provide that representation to all of our community. And so I think if you having all the power, to me, that's big government. And to divide that out and have a better form of government that allows more voices in that government is more efficient government.
So I'll shut up after this.
This is great.
Okay, let's talk about this, because that is really an argument for the status quo, not for the principle. If you're talking about the principle that you want the smallest amount of government ever, then you have one king. Okay, we don't really like that idea. Or if we're really going for that grows government, well then, why aren't you arguing that we shrink government and put it down into one person with legislative and executive functions, if that's really what your goal is? But that is not what the goal is for those making that argument. Their goal is, we like the status quo. And that's fine, but I don't think that it's appropriate to make the argument on the basis of a principle that growing government is inherently bad. What we're talking about is growing government for the purpose of protecting citizen rights. So if you are wondering about where to go to find out what kind of principles we're talking about here, go read Federalist Paper number 51 by James Madison. Okay. That is the preeminent document on form of government, particularly as it relates to the benefits and detriments of separation of powers. And the reason why you have a redundancy of government is because you are trying to make it hard for government to impact your life negatively. That is the entire purpose. And so if you are growing staff, you're growing government. If you're growing departments, you may be growing government. But when you are talking about growing the checks and balances between government, yes, in numbers you may be growing it, but the entire purpose is to protect the rights of the citizens so that it is diffused, so that that power is diffused.
Well said.
A quick hitting answer to that, Mayor Rees, also is that simply it does not grow the budget of the government. So I don't know what it's referring to about growing government. It's also not growing the number of full-time equivalents, right? So while there's 6 people involved, 5 of them are very part-time. And so the combined budget is smaller than the 3 commission. And so I guess in the most literal and practical definition of growing, it's not.
So Commissioner Ainge, you bring up the budget. Another concern that's raised is that this is going to raise taxes or make us like Salt Lake City. So what is your response to that?
There's no connection between taxes and voting yes on Prop 9. And
I have a response that Tanner may not love, but a 3-member commission just raised taxes. I mean, so if you're saying that it can't happen under a 3-member commission, it did. And putting whether or not that was a good idea aside, the argument that it will raise taxes as opposed to what we have, I mean, it doesn't really hold water.
no, I think, look, as someone who's taken a lot of the criticism for having just gone through that process, I mean, you could argue that actually it would be more difficult to do that. I mean, first of all, now we have the first structurally balanced budget in 4 years, and the county's on the best fiscal footing it's ever been on in the last decade. And so there's no need to go through with anything. Also, the budget shrinks going to this form of government. So it's completely unnecessary. But even if this is the great thing about doing this real time, I got to turn my lights on here. But even if, people are concerned about the taxes, think about that. You could argue that it's harder to achieve, to your point, Brady, of putting limits on government through this form of government. At that point, you would need 3 out of 5 members to approve instead of just 2 out of 3.
Well, and a mayor that is, mayors are probably more likely to be populists, and they would have to not veto that. And then and so there's that other layer.
So Representative Brammer, you've talked a lot about the separation of powers. Another question or concern that comes up is that this will give the executive or the mayor too much power. Can you address that?
Well, I think that, you are going from 3 executives to 1. It's the same power, and that portion of right now, each of those people they're split in half. There's a legislative and an executive for each of those members of the commission. And the mayor is getting, would have more power from an executive standpoint than any one of those three. But the point is, it is not power to make the rules, it is only power to enforce those rules. And if the council chooses to limit what they can do by virtue of the rules, then that mayor does not have the grand and expansive powers that they, that people are imagining. And so, really what it comes down to is, what powers will the council delegate to the mayor to go forward on? And I will say this, a lot of the executive decisions that are related to the current issue of COVID, I would here, I'm one of 104 in the legislative body of Utah, but I can tell you that some of that will be limited as is, and that will be put more with we're going to try to push it more towards the legislative branches of each government to have a more thoughtful review of rules and things that are being put into place with COVID. But to answer your question, it's the same power, but it is concentrated in one person, because those executive functions are intended to be through a single line of authority and executed efficiently.
I think you raised an important point, which is ultimately a county and a city is a political subdivision of the state. So the entity that has ultimate authority over what powers a county mayor has or a city mayor has is the state legislature. And as you mentioned, the state legislature can come in and address any concerns that have been raised, and have done so in the past.
The mayors like it when we do, but yeah.
One more.
I will agree to that.
One more limiting factor to the influence or power of a county mayor, I think, is the fact that so much of the county responsibility is handled by independently elected officials in the county who are also carrying out the executive functions. So Sheriff Smith, today he did his annual report of the sheriff's office, and grateful for all the great work that they do. And his department represents over half of our county budget. He's independently elected. The county commission or the county mayor doesn't get to tell him how to do his job on a day-to-day basis. Same thing, we have an independently elected county attorney, which represents another significant portion of our budget. He's carrying out that executive authority in terms of prosecuting felonies throughout the county and other critical functions that the county mayor does not directly oversee. And then lastly, the clerk auditor running elections and all these other functions. And so I think that's important to realize, that there really is, that to your point, the state legislature has defined a relatively narrow scope for this county executive to operate within.
And to that point that you just raised, Sheriff Smith, one of the questions that has come up as well is, we do have all of these other executives who are elected at the county level, the county sheriff, the prosecutor, the clerk auditor, et cetera. And so a question comes up, why do we need a mayor if we already have these 7 other executives, or however many there are? There's already a separation of powers between the commission and the independently elected officials. So can you explain a little bit how, even though you're an executive within the county, how that differs from an executive at the county commission level or a county mayor council level?
Yeah, so when it comes to, it really comes down to the budget. So when it comes to the budget and how that money's allocated, how it's used, even once it's approved, the checks and balances that are in place in the county, to whether it's from getting purchase orders, whether it's from getting contracts signed, there's so many layers of things that require the elected officials to work back through the commission to get POs approved, to get processes approved, to get contracts approved. And I've said this before, but coming from a previous type of government with the mayor council, and then coming over to this 3 commission form of government, it has been very laborsome and burdensome to get through these processes. So even though I'm elected, and my job is to run the sheriff's office and provide public safety, our interactions with the commission are really a daily basis, with trying to get processes approved and move forward on things to provide that public safety to our community. And My biggest push for this, it's everything. I agree with everything that's being said here tonight, but my biggest push for this is a more efficient and effective form of government that allows the sheriff's office, because that's my duty, to perform more effectively and efficiently when we need things done. And when there's some type of emergency or whatever it may be, that I'm not waiting on decisions to be made and approvals to be made because I have to track down 3 people and get them all to agree that this needs to happen. And I can tell you from firsthand experiences from almost the week that I started as sheriff, when South County was on fire and we were evacuating entire cities in the South County, that instantly it was an issue for me and it caused us problems.
Mayor Rees,
Yes.
I would value your perspective as a mayor on this, because I'm not sure everyone appreciates this. This will be fun for Sheriff Smith to think about, or at least go back to his Pleasant Grove days as chief of police. But right, what he's talking about, to give a couple of examples, we could go through a public process of setting the budget for the sheriff's department. And let's just say there's a line item that is approved in that public process. Now we go into the next year. Sheriff Smith wants to get a contract approved. In an executive council, that still might be an approval from the chief executive, but in the commission form of government, that actually has to go on our agenda in a public meeting and voted on with 2 out of the 3, just to have that contract signed. That was already approved as part of the budget. Then when he goes to purchase the item, that doesn't necessarily go into a commission meeting on our public agenda, but it does go into an internal approval system where instead of picking up the phone and talking to one person, 2 out of 3 commissioners have to sign off to let that go through. And so there are so many steps where I know those are some of the things that the sheriff is talking about.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think that was touched on a little bit earlier too, on that where you want the legislative branch to be deliberative, but you want the executive branch to be efficient and being able to move forward. And so, like you said, from a city perspective, once the council has set a budget or approved a policy, moving forward from that point, I can work directly with our city manager and our department heads to just get it done. It doesn't have to come back to a council meeting every single time in order to get approval. And one can look at a commission agenda just to see the number of items that are on it every single week, to see how much of that could be pulled off the table if we had an executive who just had the authority to then implement policy that's been set by the legislative branch. Totally agree. Representative Brammer, I want to ask you this one. Another concern that has been raised is if we have part-time council members, they won't be as engaged and they won't be as knowledgeable to the issues, and it will be easy for a mayor to come in and just take control. And our state legislature is obviously a part-time legislative body. So how would you address those concerns?
Well, I think that it's not, I suppose it could happen, but I don't think people are running for office that are not engaged, that do not have opinions. And I don't think that I don't see city council members getting steamrolled by their mayors on a regular basis. I don't see legislators getting steamrolled, and I see, what I see is the benefit here of having part-time people. If that's the case, why don't we go to a full-time legislature? Why are people resistant to that? It's because you start to lose contact with the people when you're not part of the economy. When you are dependent on the economy producing tax revenue for your job, I think that you're less likely to be as knowledgeable about what's going on within the community. I'm in my law office, and I spend 8 to 10 hours a day working, and then I go spend 2 or 3 hours at night after I put my kids down doing legislative stuff. It's not easy, but it's something that I do. And what I think you'll see that we get is better candidates. No offense, Tanner. I love you. You're great. But what I'm saying is there are not a lot of people whose lives are in a position that they can say, I want to put my job in a precarious position based on an election. That's really not common. And there's not a lot of people who are really performing highly in various organizations that say, I want to take my high performance, put it on the shelf, and then go serve in a county commission. It's a rare, it's a very small subset of the population. And so what you're looking for is very high performing people that can do the job, that don't have to give up their entire life in order to serve effectively. And I think we get a whole lot broader pool of candidates for a council member position than we would currently get for a county commission position.
Brady, no offense taken. In fact, you all know that I'm a convert to some of the principles here on Prop 9. Because the initial referendum was put into place right as I took office, and I wanted to like live through and experience some of this stuff before I formed a firm opinion on it. And so now, for example, this three-headed CEO or three CEOs doing a job is one of the primary reasons why I support Prop 9. We need to get away from that model. But before that, the one thing I knew during the campaign and initially was that part-time is better. And, you know, I'll say something that Brady can't say. I, for one, Brady's my representative in the state legislature. And I like the fact that I have a highly qualified person who's attractive in the marketplace, who has a law degree. And I know that he wouldn't do that for some low full-time salary, but to be a part of his community and serve on a part-time legislature, we get great candidates. And it's the same thing in city councils throughout this community. And even our mayors, a lot of our mayors are part-time. And you look at the caliber of people. I mean, we have business owners who serve as part-time mayors. You know, we look in Provo City Council, and a lot of the city council members, it's, you know, they typically will have one or two professors from Brigham Young University there. And it allows for so many different people and high caliber people to participate. And when I was running for county commission and thinking about running, actually, I reached out. I was really concerned. We all know, we're not going to get a lot into this, but we have a history of dysfunction on the county commission. And we also have a history of at least a couple really troubling personalities and the activities they did when they got into the county commission. And so I think that this most recent cycle, more of us were thinking about that and considering jumping in. And I reached out to a number of community leaders before throwing my hat in and saying, hey, would you run? We really need some new leadership at the county level. And what I found is the most successful people, the people I really looked up to, is they all told me no. And the full-time nature was one of it. And the irony is, these are people who serve in their churches or would serve on the city council, and they give a large number of hours. But that's just not who they are. They don't want to give up either some of their business interests or some of their part-time activities. And they just feel like they're not in a phase of life where they're looking for a quote unquote full-time gig. But if it had been pitched as, hey, this is a part-time council, even if you end up spending a ton of your time in the week, those people would have been willing to step up and serve. So I view this as one of the best qualities of yes on Prop 9.
Thank you. Brady, it looks like you're on mute.
Who doesn't want less full-time politicians?
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you there. So I brought this up a little bit earlier, and I'm not sure we fully covered it. So Commissioner Ainge, I'm just going to ask you, again, a big concern is this is the first step to becoming Salt Lake County. And so what is your response to that?
I think that you just have to, again, I don't think there's anything different. The way I answer that question, and others can approach it differently, is this body, both the executive and legislative bodies, have the same authority and influence, whether it's in the 3-member commission or in a council mayor. So if it's taxes you're concerned, both forms could raise taxes. If you want to expand the role of government, right now, Utah County has a much more limited government than Salt Lake County because we don't perform non-essential services. I mean, we're much smaller. There's no development happening in Utah County, so we don't have to provide a lot of the services. We don't have county rec centers or county libraries. And so, but the county commission could decide to do that right now. The county commission could decide, people criticize Salt Lake County. They have a ton of executive staff or a lot of deputy mayors. Right now, the county commission could double the size of the staff. but so could, and so it's not about the form of government. I think that's just about who do we elect and what are the political priorities and ideologies of those we put into office. And right now, Utah counties, I don't think that changes based on the form of government. It changes based on who we put into the office.
I think to your point, as you mentioned, there's nothing inherent in a form of government that either creates more spending or prevents more spending. Cache County has the same form of government that Salt Lake County has, and from a spending perspective, you couldn't find two more different counties. Their per capita spending is very close to Utah counties, even with their executive council form of government.
That's a great point.
Let's see. Oh, and Representative Brammer, I was just going to ask you on that same topic. You've brought up the interesting dynamic if Salt Lake County still had the 3-commissioner model. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's imagine that Salt Lake County had Utah County's form of government. What would that be like? Well, you're talking about 3 generally elected members of their commission that have both the executive and legislative functions. And so you're probably talking about a Jenney Wilson, maybe a Jim DeBacchus, and one other, but you're going to have a majority that the entire south end of the county in Salt Lake is more conservative, but there's more people in the north end of Salt Lake County that are more liberal. And so you would have, because because Salt Lake County is divided by districts, they actually have representation from a conservative perspective on their council. If it was 3 members like Utah counties, there would be no real conservative representation at all. It would be far worse than what it is now. I want you to imagine 3 Jenney Wilsons making their policy and executing their laws. My goodness, that is not a good outcome. And the reality is, down the line, as we grow and double in population over the next 30 years or so, there are likely going to be areas that turn purple or blue in Utah County. And those areas could have enough influence to bring a more liberal thought pattern to Utah County. And, while this is a little bit more partisan than maybe this is, than maybe the discussion typically has been, if you want to protect what we have now, you're much better off having it be done in a way that creates regional representation throughout the county and protects far more conservative areas like North Utah County, where I'm at, which has the highest number of registered Republicans in any district in the state. Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, incredibly conservative. South County, incredibly conservative. But then you've got Orem and Provo that are not as conservative as the other areas. Those could overwhelm and could potentially create 3 county commissioners that are far more liberal than their population would be. And all of those outlying areas of the county would be at risk of losing their voice entirely. And so, thank goodness Salt Lake does not have our county commission format.
And that last point is a good segue into my last question, and I'm just going to throw it out there for any of the 3 of you who want to answer. But what is the benefit to dividing up our county into regions where each region elects 1 county council member as opposed to having the 3 that are elected at large right now?
I'm happy to jump in on that one here for a minute. I think the first thing is at least guarantees you that your community is going to have a voice, right? I think right now, so I think historically it's actually been pretty good, but in theory, you could have 3 people from the same zip code serving as county commission. And I feel like that people wouldn't feel represented that way. And so this guarantees that at least everyone has a voice on the council. More importantly, I want to talk for a minute about the election here, because I think that matters. One of the challenges I think that also affects the candidates that we have and why we've had some interesting times on the commission or some dysfunctional candidates has been that people don't know who the county commissioners are. They don't know who the county commission candidates are. And this may or may not be accurate, but the way I see it is it's kind of like, the governor's race or the congressional or senatorial candidates, they're on TV. They're hitting you with mailers. They're on social media. You know who those people are. And then your city council members and your mayor, one, they only have to target a small population, and so they can also send you a mailer, but they also live in your community, so you get to know them. You go to that event and you actually know those personalities. Whereas the county elections, they sit somewhere in the middle, where we're trying to reach out to 650,000 residents on shoestring budgets. So I think in our cycle, none of the county commission candidates sent a single mailer to anyone in the county, I mean, or a county-wide mailer. They may have sent it to delegates, and no one's on TV, and the budgets just would never line up for that. And so what you have is people they know at the top of the ticket, they know at the bottom of the ticket, and in the middle, they're kind of guessing. And so I do think that by breaking this up, the regional districts, it's more likely that the people within that region voting for that candidate really know and have vetted that candidate and feel like it's a voice when they're making that vote that they really want to represent them, instead of just guessing between a couple people that they might not even know.
Sure. Well, thank you for helping with us tonight. Is there anything that I didn't bring up that you were hoping to address? Looks like no. Okay. Well, I appreciate all of your input. We're going to put this on our social media sites and our website. Again, for anybody who wants to find out more information, you can visit our website at www.betterutahcounty.com. Our contact information is there as well, so feel free to shoot us an email and we'll be happy to respond. And thanks to all of you for participating tonight.
Thank you.
Jenney.